Thank you for joining us today on this Wednesday, March 17th. It is St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. And today's topic in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which is totally unrelated, is the COVID-19 vaccine. So if you're listening today, I'm assuming that you are an owner or a manager in some sort of position to make some decisions about the vaccine in your workplace. And so we will definitely chat about that today, about the options that you have, best practices, things to consider. And then of course, we will take your questions. This is a little bit of a long deck. If you can't join us for the full hour, we will post this on the COVID page on our website by close of business today. There's a lot to uncover. So bear with us. You can always submit questions at any point using the Q&A function on your screen and not the chats. The Q&A allows us to record those questions after the fact, and the chat does not. So it'd be helpful if you could use the Q&A. That'd be great. Thank you. And again, you can key those in anytime while I am yammering on about the vaccine. I think that's all in terms of housekeeping. My friend Tracy is with me today as my wing person. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, how are you?
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you. I noticed you have your green on.
Thanks to Isabel, who did my slide for me from our communications team. She made it green. I am actually I'm not wearing green for some reason, but I do have lots of ties to Ireland in my blood. So I should put some green on at some point, but in any case. All right. So we're talking about the vaccine. Tracy and I are just going to I'm going to roll through some slides. She's going to ask me some questions. We're going to take your questions and we'll try to decipher everything that we can. I'm going to put in the chat really quick a link to the CDC's website, which we will get to towards the end of this. The first part of this is based mostly on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's guidance, which if you've tuned in before, you'll notice that I've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating, particularly because it's been about 5 or 6 weeks since we did a webinar on the vaccine, and things have changed a little bit. There are new vaccines now, there are new variants of the virus, and excuse me, and then things are beginning to speed up in terms of availability. Also, the American Rescue Plan, which was passed this month, has expanded the qualifying reasons for paid leave to include employees wishing to get the vaccine and or recover from side effects. So that kicks in April 1st and goes through September 30th. So that's good news, because if you want to incentivize somebody to get the vaccine, giving them paid time off to do so is a great way to do that. And now you can get a tax credit for those hours, so you won't even have to pay for those wages. So more on that in a second. If you tuned in yesterday to our webinar, we went more into detail on the changes to the FFCRA leaves, and that should be up on our website or in our YouTube channel as of now. So if you missed that, or if you need a refresher, you can go and see a more in-depth look about the FFCRA paid leaves. So I'll just note here that the EEOC latest guidance is still date stamped December 16th. I check it all the time. It hasn't been updated yet. I don't know if it needs to be updated, but I'll just put that out there. And then the CDC guidance is, of course, ongoing. And the link I put in the chat is a really great resource for employers considering to do a vaccine workplace policy. All right. So the biggest question that I hear from clients is this one. Tracy's going to be my question reader.
Should we have a vaccine policy for our workplace, and should it be mandatory or voluntary?
Glad you asked that, Tracy. The answer is yes, you should have a policy in place, but should it be mandatory or voluntary? That's a whole nother ball of wax. I will say that you could choose to not have a policy in place. That's sort of your third option between mandatory, voluntary, or no policy. I like a policy because I think that it will help you in the long run, sort of, because we're still not sure what's going to happen this year. 2021 is still, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in that tunnel. There are variants out there. People have questions about the vaccine. They have questions about returning to work, and putting a policy in place, even if it's no matter what the policy is, gives your employees some structure and understanding of where your head is and what it is that you require or expect or encourage in order for you to maintain your commitment to the OSHA standards, which say that you have a commitment to your as an employer, you must provide a safe space for your employees and your clients, and you can't do that if people are going to be spreading a deadly virus. So I think that the conventional wisdom is that a vaccine policy is better than no policy. The question is, should it be mandatory or voluntary? So we're going to go through some risks and considerations here. And again, some of you might have heard me say this before in a previous webinar. This really hasn't changed. The mandatory policy really should be balanced with what your unique situation is. So the overall risk to the organization, consideration of job functions, and the importance of the vaccine to your operations. Certainly, if you're in certain industries, you might have your own guidelines, like education, healthcare. If you go this route, you need to be prepared to make reasonable accommodations for anyone with disabilities or sincerely held religious belief. More on this in a second. And then if somebody has side effects for after the vaccine, you might want to check with, before you even launch your policy, check with your workers' compensation provider to discuss if there could be claims potentially filed for side effects. However, now that the American Rescue Plan provides paid sick leave for people who have side effects from the vaccine, you might not even have to go that route. You just give them the day off or 2 days off and go from there.
And also, I think people should also be prepared to revisit their policy as things change. So I know sometimes things get into a handbook and then nobody ever revisits that, but things are changing all the time, and it'd be important to keep that updated.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And you don't have to necessarily, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you might want to consult with, if you have an HR department, consult with them, or maybe outside counsel to just chat about what should be, just to have an extra set of eyes on the policy you come up with. And like Tracy said, this is a great time to go back and look at all of your policies around sick leave, and also familiarize yourself with the FFCRA if you're not already. So considerations for mandatory policy continued here. Just be aware that Section 7 of the NLRA protects non-supervisory employees' rights to discuss and even complain about your vaccine policy on social media. So if you roll out a mandatory vaccine, you might have some people that are unhappy with that, and that's their right to do so, and they have a right to discuss it without you retaliating against them. Any medical information collected during the process must be kept confidential. This includes an employee's reason for not getting the vaccine. So if you have somebody who has who requests an exemption due and a reasonable accommodation, the accommodation being not getting the vaccine, you cannot share that information. It needs to stay with you or your sort of tight group of trusted vaccine committee members, and then you would file that in their employee file separate from the other information. And then if getting the vaccine is a condition of employment, i.e. it's mandatory, I would consult with counsel on any sort of, like, what's the path you take if someone just objects and they just will not get it. And we'll talk more about this in a second, but sort of get that termination plan ready, or if there's a way, depending on your situation, if that person could work, if there could be something else they could do that wouldn't put other people at risk, you can make that accommodation. But sort of the nuclear option here is if you have a mandatory policy, you need to have a plan in place for people that don't get it. Are you actually going to terminate them, or are you going to shift them into a different role? What's the plan for that? So another thing to remember or to consider if you have a mandatory policy is that the rollout is spotty. So it definitely has sped up in the last 5 or 6 weeks, but it's still not available to everybody. So you might not want to put a deadline on it just yet because some employees might not have access to it at the same time as others. You also might have people who leave. And I know that sounds extreme, but you just don't know what people's beliefs are. So far, I've only seen one lawsuit filed against an employer by somebody who just didn't want the vaccine, but that was against a public agency and not a private organization. So I think everybody's sort of waiting to see what 2021 bears out in terms of litigation and laws around the rights of employees and the rights of employers. But right now, you have the right to require a vaccine and make it a workplace or a condition of employment. Alternately, particularly if you are in an at-will state, your employees have the right to quit if they don't like your policy. So just be prepared for that. And then, like I said earlier, you should allow employees to get the vaccine during working hours and compensate them for that time. And as of April 1st, you can realize fully refundable tax credits for those hours using FFCRA leave. And that runs through, as of now, runs through September 30th. So that's great news. And that's just one barrier that you can remove to having full compliance with your policy. So that was mandatory. The voluntary policy is a bit less risky. You might have read in the news that there are some companies that have been announced their incentive programs. Some big name companies are offering cash incentives or other types of ways to sweeten the deal to get their numbers up because it's a voluntary policy. So people could opt out. They don't even need a reason to opt out. They just can opt out. I would be real careful about incentivizing in a way that will make employees who have medical or religious objections to the vaccine feel unduly discriminated against. So maybe you could consider a collective goal, as in if we meet our 80% vaccination goal, we all get a day off or something like that. If your incentive is something really small, say you do an on-site vaccination drive, like a mobile clinic comes to your parking lot or something, and you have, some smaller little prizes or giveaways that you're giving out in the parking lot to people, or everybody gets a cup or a water bottle or something, that's not a big deal. But if we're talking about cash or days off or another sort of something, I would say over $100, and you might want to check with an attorney just to make sure that that sort of wellness program is something that is, just on the up and up. You can also educate, lead by example, and again, make it easy to get. Allow paid time off, cover any costs, and allow paid time off for side effects too. And again, you can use those FFCRA leaves for both the time it takes to go get the vaccine as well as time off for any potential side effects. And I know you might be a little bit eye-rolly about that, like really, like what's a real side effect that would prevent somebody from working? And we've all heard, there are some side effects, especially I've heard anecdotally after the second shot. I just say, if somebody gets it and they call in sick the next day, just let them take the day off. And then, because in the long run, that's better than them actually getting COVID or actually, having to quarantine and miss even more time than just one day. And this is for mandatory and voluntary, but everybody should continue to follow the CDC's guidance for businesses and employers responding to COVID-19, which states that as of now, face masks and social distancing and hand washing should continue in the workplace no matter who's vaccinated and who's not. They have issued a little bit relaxed guidance for people who are vaccinated if they're around other fully vaccinated people. For instance, if you have a meeting in a conference room and it's 4 people who have gotten all of their shots and it's been 2 weeks since that last shot, they're saying that you can relax the face covering rule. But for now, as your workforce, likely isn't fully vaccinated, the federal guidance is to keep social distancing and face masks in place. The state guidance, as we probably all heard in the news, is changing per state. So know that the federal guidance remains cautious. Your state might have a different story to tell. So I would check with that policy and adhere to it. If your state, I'll just note, if your state has lifted mask requirements, you have the option to continue to follow the federal guidelines. It's, you might have to work through that and work through some scenarios if you have employees who object to it or clients who object to it, but you have the right to observe the federal guidelines over the state. Okay, and a couple other just quick things about incentives. Like I mentioned earlier, this could be considered, incentivizing the vaccine could be considered a wellness program. And we all sort of know what that means. Wellness programs in the time of pre-COVID are just that. They're, group collective goals and incentives for people to get healthy, to eat better, to otherwise improve their fitness or their mental health. But you just need to be real careful, like I said, that you're not discriminating, you're not excluding people who otherwise would participate, but that they have a disability or a religious objection, that takes them out of the running for whatever incentive that you have on the table. I would consult counsel if you have the opportunity, and again, consider a collective incentive. If we achieve 80%, we all get a day off or something like that. And everybody benefits. And yes, maybe you might have somebody who grumbles about the people who didn't get the vaccine getting the day off. But ultimately what you're trying to do is get those numbers up to a level that makes your workplace compliant with OSHA standards and, back to business as normal.
Hey, Leslie.
Yeah.
There is a request in questions that's would like the link to the guidance for business and employers responding to COVID-19. There it is. Do you have that link?
Did you click on it? Let me see. Hold on a sec. Whoops, sorry. Hold, please. If you click on it, does it take you to it?
I don't have a click.
All right, hold on a second. Let's see if I can just. Bear with me, everybody. I'm going to get you that link.
Thank you.
All right. All right, give me one more sec and we will keep going. Whoops. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. So just as a quick review, we just went through mandatory versus voluntary vaccines and the fact that I'm recommending that you should have a policy in place and just no matter which way you go, take into account the considerations that we just put out there. The next set of questions are going to be based on guidance from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the commission that determines the ADA or interprets the ADA, and how that applies to the vaccine is in the exemption space. So particularly if you go the mandatory route, you need to be prepared to handle exemptions, and we'll talk about those in the next couple slides.
Okay. Employees may claim to have a disability or a religious belief to avoid getting the vaccine. How can we determine whether an employee's claim of disability or a sincerely held religious belief is legitimate?
Okay. I know these slides are wordy, but you all know by now that I like to put these words up here so that you can have them when you download the deck later on from our website. First of all, and I don't put this, I think I mentioned this later in the presentation, but before you even float your policy, go ahead and establish who is going to be your COVID vaccine committee, or committee of more than one, or committee of one, depending on your size, and then decide who among those folks will be the one to receive requests. So when you float your policy to your employees, give them very clear instructions for how to ask questions and where to route, how to make requests. So, and that person should be trained to treat every accommodation request consistently and assume that each request is bona fide. If it's on the basis of disability, this one's a little bit more straightforward because you can ask for documentation from a healthcare provider. So if any of you have fielded ADA requests before, you have probably been involved in the interactive process, which means that you would engage a physician and there's a form that you would ask the physician to fill out, and you ask the physician to make a recommendation around the accommodation. And in this case, the accommodation is to not get the vaccine. So that's pretty straightforward. The religious exemption is a little bit different in that there's no request form. It's really a conversation. Title VII has a real broad definition of religion, and it protects beliefs and practices with which you might be unfamiliar. If it's well known to you that this person is a member of this religion and this request seems pretty intuitive, then I would just document it. And you can find on our website on the COVID page, 2 forms. One, a request for an accommodation based on disability, and then the other one is based on religion. But if you have an objective doubt, you really think this person is pulling your leg or doesn't know, really is just trying to use this as a reason not to get the vaccine. If you have counsel, I would consult them. This is a real tricky area. And if you go online and Google, religions that don't believe in vaccines, there will be a list that comes up. I don't recommend, really taking the employee to task and demanding that they identify which religion that they are part of and where they worship, and any more details like that. But this is the guidance that the EEOC has. And so when the guidance is this sort of subjective, I would talk to an HR professional or legal counsel if you have some people who are who are asking for a religious exemption and you really are not sure if it's bona fide.
What about employees who simply don't trust or believe in the vaccine?
So I mentioned earlier that we're starting to see some lawsuits, but as of now, according to the federal guidance, if you have a mandatory vaccine policy, you can deny them work. But before you do that, like I said earlier, termination is the last resort. And I know this is annoying, but I would definitely consult counsel on your plan here, your plan of action here. We just don't know. This is just a very fluid area of the law right now. We've just never really been in this situation. Well, we've been in this situation in the education community with vaccine for children, but this is a different situation. This is people's job. This is their livelihood. And so especially if you have a mandatory vaccine, I would go ahead and consult counsel on what to do if you have somebody who objects and does not have a religious or medical basis for doing so.
Okay. Is the administration of a COVID-19 vaccine to an employee by an employer or by a third party for whom the employer contracts to administer a vaccine a medical examination for purposes of the ADA?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of people sort of chafe at, it's weird for your employer to mandate any sort of medical examination or test, right? That's just, it seems squishy and weird, and I totally get that. But technically, according to the EEOC, it is not a medical examination. Basically, what they're saying is that the dividing line here is that a medical examination actually seeks information about the individual's health status or impairments. But what they're saying here is that the vaccine is not seeking that information. So if you have some, this is sort of part of the education piece that you could launch in your workplace to help disseminate or dissuade some potential fears or objections. You're not asking them to undergo a medical examination, at least by the definition of the EEOC. And then to dovetail with that, I believe the next question, well, real quick, a plug to say that the ADA requires employees to keep any employee's information confidential. So for some reason, over the course of your vaccination program, you stumble across or an employee volunteers something that is protected medical information, like they're pregnant or have some sort of pre-existing condition, and this comes your way, you need to keep it certainly verbally confidential, but if it's in writing, it needs to be kept in their personnel file, but separate from any other information in that personnel file, so that if somebody goes in there looking for a performance review or a resume, they're not going to stumble across the medical information. So it's very important to keep that separate. If you use paper files, you can just have a separate filing cabinet. If you use electronic system, just make sure it's partitioned, and you should be fine.
Can we ask an employee to show proof of receipt of a COVID-19 vaccination?
Yes, you can, but you can't ask them why if they haven't gotten it. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So if, like I said, no matter what policy you have, access to the vaccine, it might just be a timing issue. It might just be like Tracy hasn't been called up yet. Or it might be that there might be some other reason why she can't get it. I just can't ask why. I can ask her to let me know yes or no. But I can require proof. But we should not ask for anything else. And if the employee volunteers any medical information, you shouldn't record it. I mean, unless they give it to you in an email, like I said earlier, if they give it to you in writing and you have it in your possession, you can choose to either destroy it, or if you do keep it confidential in a confidential file. But otherwise, you just can't ask why they haven't gotten it yet.
So what about like when you said if you had a mandatory one and you had people who had a disability or religious belief, you are asking them why then, aren't you?
Well, that's true. Well, they're making an official request for an accommodation. So yes, if you have somebody who comes to you and says, I have a medical condition, then yes, you would ask
So
them.
wait a minute. So if you have a mandatory vaccine policy and you have people who don't get it, you can't ask them why?
You can't but you can say if you can give them a path to make an official request to not get it based on medical or religious reasons.
I see. So you would say something like, if you have a disability or a sincere religious belief that prevents you from getting the vaccine, please submit a request or please submit some form.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
So for instance, like I have one client, they're in the medical field. So they did a mandatory policy, and we've been planning for this rollout. We're going to roll it out soon. They are using iSolved, which is our platform, for those of you who are our clients, you are familiar, to actually track who has gotten it and who hasn't. So we're training their managers to how to go in and track and actually upload a picture of their vaccine card. And then every Friday run a report so that management can see where the numbers are. And then part of the sort of ongoing rollout plan, understand this is a multi-state organization, so that employees have different access levels and timing concerns than others. So they haven't put a deadline on when everyone needs to receive it, but they are monitoring it, and then they're setting up sort of reminders for gentle nudges for people who keep showing up in the have not gotten it column to please go get it. And then there's always a disclaimer at the end, like, please talk to so-and-so if you need to make a request for an accommodation or have a question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
There is a question out
Okay.
there. Brenda says, my employees are sending emails to everyone stating that they are getting their vaccines. Should we request that they not release this information?
If the employees volunteer it, that's fine. I mean, that's similar to if they volunteer, that's similar to like if you have a positive COVID case. You as the employer are barred from outing that person as being COVID positive, but if they want to tell people, that's fine. Because you might have some people who are super enthusiastic and they'll wear a "I got vaccinated" sticker, and they are encouraging others to get it, and that's their prerogative. But if you think that's weird and is bothering other people and they're using company email to do that, then you can have a policy saying, you know what, guys, you can share that with other people using your own email address or your own social media, but let's not talk about it using our company addresses. So I hope that answers your question. All right.
What if an employee who is exempt due to a bona fide disability poses a health risk to our other employees?
All right, so this is kind of a murky area, but I'm going to tell you what the EEOC says. So basically what we've done here is this employee has gone through the official channels of requesting an exemption from getting the vaccine based on allowable reasons, which is religion or a disability. But yet, what they're saying here is that you still have a requirement that you are not posing a direct threat to the health or safety of individuals in the workplace. So in order to sort of conduct an assessment of each individual situation to see, say I didn't get vaccinated and I would like to go back to the office and work in my office. And I'm not vaccinated because you are part of the vaccine committee. Not necessarily everybody else doesn't, other people might not know, but and I know. And I'm able to work in my office and have the door closed and not interact with a lot of people, then that's probably fine. If I walk to the bathroom here and there or go grab a soda, it's not a long duration that I'm hanging out with people in a closed space. And I could probably be fine without any other sort of accommodation. If the nature of my job is to be up close and personal with other employees or clients, then that's a different situation. And so they're saying here that you need to assess the duration of the risk, the nature and severity, the likelihood that the potential harm here being the spread of the virus, and then the imminence. And so this is again EEOC language, and realizing that every situation is different, you would need to look at each situation individually. And I think this is going to be another interesting thing this year to see how this plays out. I mean, once federal and state agencies begin lifting or loosening face mask and social distancing requirements, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the guidance is around, okay, that's great, but 20% of my workforce is unvaccinated. How do we continue safely? Do we require those people to still wear masks? And how do we do that if that means they're going to basically, it's going to be very clear who's vaccinated and who's not. And I don't know the answers to that yet. But I suspect as we move through this sort of early spring, late spring, early summer, when the numbers start to go up in terms of vaccinations, we're going to butt heads with this sort of situation. I'm already seeing news that the EU, for instance, is going to be issuing COVID passports. So if you want to travel, you need to identify yourself as vaccinated, and then what happens if, what are the exceptions to that rule? And I have every reason to believe that that conversation will carry over into the workplace. So possibly a future webinar topic just on that alone. So, and if you, like I said in the description of this webinar on the website, if you have any anecdotes or things that you're doing in your workplace that you want to share with us, please do. We are always interested in listening to your innovative solutions or situations that are coming up, and how you're handling them. All right, so continuing on that vein, so if there is a conclusion that I'm a direct threat because I'm unvaccinated and I will expose others to the virus, I can be excluded from the workplace. So in my situation, my boss, Tracy, could potentially say, you know what, why don't you just work from home? We've been working from home, let's just work from home, and that's fine. But that's because my job can be done from home. If my job cannot be done from home and there's no way to provide a reasonable accommodation, maybe to give me an office if I don't have one, move me to a different part of the building, in some way to make it so that I'm not around a lot of people, then do that. But if you can't do that, you can exclude the employee from physically entering the workplace. But the termination question is something I would run by a counsel. Because again, that is the nuclear option, and that's the most risky option in terms of some sort of wrongful termination suit against you. And we just don't know there's not a lot of precedent in this area yet. So as soon as we know some more precedent, we will let you know. But so right now there's this weird gray area between you have a responsibility to not put your employees in harm's way, and that includes a potential deadly virus, but you also don't necessarily want to wrongfully terminate somebody. So that's where legal counsel should be consulted. All right, so what should we do now? And just so you know, I have a couple other slides that I have hidden because the full presentation today would take like 90 minutes of your time, but I will, when we post this on the site, I'll make sure the full presentation is available so you can see all of the slides, but I did hide some today because it's a really long presentation. All right, so getting to some tactical items here. What I would do for you, or if I were you, I would organize a vaccine committee. Depending on your size, that could involve several people from different departments, or maybe if you're a small shop, maybe just one or two people, and then make that critical decision on what your policy should be. Mandatory, voluntary, and will you go the incentive route? Decide whether to collect information and how to do so. So example, I mentioned I have a client using iSolve to track who has received a vaccination, and they are actually asking employees to upload photos of their vaccination card. Then you need to decide who will actually do this. Will the employee do it? Will their manager do it? Will HR do it? What's the mechanism behind the tracking? I think there's no one has told me that you have to track. I haven't seen any guidance, and if you've seen otherwise out there, please let me know. But I haven't seen any guidance about having to track. We certainly saw guidance from the states about reporting positive COVID cases. And I see an effort here by the CDC for people to report vaccine side effects because they want to know, that information. But I don't see anything saying whether or not you have to, as an employer, track the information. I think that it would be nice to know. And again, this year is going to be really weird in that regard. We just don't know at what point that data will be useful or called upon, whether by maybe there's an accrediting agency that accredits you in your field, or you have contracts that you have certain stipulations. Maybe your organization provides employees that go work at other organizations, and that organization might want to know. So I would hate for you to 6 months from now be asked, oh, so what's your overall vaccination rate, and you don't have it, and then you're denied that accreditation or that grant. And again, I don't know if that's going to be a thing. I don't think it's going to be an extreme, restaurants are going to have to post their overall vaccination rates on their website or something like that. I don't think it's going to go quite that far, but it's probably useful to have if you can track it somehow. Also decide who on your committee will field any questions, concerns, or exemption requests, and determine the process for that. So you need to be very clear with your employees about who they should go to. And that's not only the right thing to do, but that hopefully will cut down on workplace chatter and rumor, and just make it real clear, like, this is the person you go to, here's the request form, and each case will be considered individually. Decide on whether you will use FFCRA leave to compensate employees seeking vaccination and or are unable to work due to side effects. So this is a voluntary program. You don't have to use FFCRA leave, unlike in 2020 when it was a mandatory. Now it's discretionary, but it's the government paying the wages for you. So I feel like it's kind of a no-brainer, but you don't have to use it if you don't want to. But I do suggest, particularly if you have a mandatory policy, allowing paid time off in some fashion for people who are seeking vaccinations and or have side effects. And again, FFCRA leave for vaccinations is April 1st through September 30th. That's when those leaves are available. And then develop your communications plan. So once you have all of these things decided, then you want to message out to your employees what the situation is, and then go from there. Some other things to consider in the sort of the best practices realm. So we didn't talk today about whether or not if you'd want to go ahead and do an on-site vaccination drive. So say you have a third-party healthcare provider that comes in for a couple days and vaccinates all of your qualified employees, or you have a mobile health clinic come to the parking lot and you do sort of an event on site. That's really good if you are a large business, a lot of people are working the same spot, you're able to get sort of a critical mass in on site. So it's similar to like a blood drive or something like that, and you want to give out water bottles or some sort of prize. That would be a good option for you if you fall in that category. And then other employers can just say, you know what, we're not going to do that because we're not set up to do it, or it doesn't make sense for us, but here are some links for, here's how you can in your state or locality get on the list. So regardless of which route you go, here are some things to consider. Again, flexible, non-punitive sick leave options for employees with signs and symptoms after vaccination. And then allow time for vaccine confidence to grow. Workers who are hesitant at first may become more confident after seeing coworkers get vaccinated. So depending on your culture, you might be fine with employees emailing one another or posting to Slack or Teams that they got vaccinated. But just understand that might have some downsides too for people who feel excluded in some way. So you might want to think about what happens if you have a complaint about that. You could have a mobile clinic come the first week in April, and then again the first week in May for those people who just maybe first week in April was too soon for them. They were still unsure. They wanted to see more and more people get the vaccine, and then you can bring the mobile clinic back and maybe pick up round two of folks who have allowed that confidence to grow. And then ask organizations and individuals who are respected in employee communities to help you build confidence in COVID-19 vaccines, just to be the, sort of another voice, another consideration, another advocate for getting the vaccine. And the final things to consider, you can also, as part of your education campaign, share messages with staff through break room posters, emails, and other channels. You can educate them on the benefits of protecting themselves, their families, coworkers, and community. As you all probably know, the CDC's website is enormous and has all sorts of tools for this type of awareness campaign. If you have trouble finding things, though, let me know. But they have posters and other information in multiple languages that you can download and use and circulate. Encourage your leaders to be vaccine champions. They should reflect the diversity of your workforce, share personal experiences with staff, personal reasons for getting vaccinated, and remind staff why it's important. And then, like I said, I know it's a bummer, but continue to follow common mask and social distancing guidelines as long as they're in place. And just so we're on the other side, till we're on the other side of this thing, and we can be more confident that these variants are going to rear their ugly head, or really what the what's the tipping point between, when can we have that immunity level to a point where we can safely walk around without a mask? And that are all of my slides.
That was
So,
awesome. I learned a whole lot.
oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. It does bring up a lot of questions though.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want to read these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. I'll put you on full screen. I have you on like a tiny screen. Alrighty. So, any news on extending the paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave for COVID reasons? I think you already answered this one. Although it stopped December 31st, employers could still offer it until March 31st, 2021. Yeah, you did answer this on previous slide, but do you want to go ahead and reiterate?
Yeah, Francine, that's a great question. So as of now, as of today, March 17th, the FFCRA leaves are discretionary. So if you have someone and it's for COVID reasons, so the original reasons that existed in 2020 are still in place. So that's if you're sick, think you're sick, have been exposed, have been ordered to quarantine, taking care of someone who's sick, or if you have a child at home due to their school or daycare being closed. Right now, this minute, you can grant leave for those reasons and get a real-time tax credit for those wages. On April 1st, those same qualifying reasons are still in place and but they're adding on the vaccine reasons. So technically, right now, you're not supposed to be offering paid FFCRA leave or getting tax credits for vaccination reasons. But as of April 1st, yes, and that will go through September 30th. And that is the other thing to remember is that as of April 1st, everyone's bank of paid leave hours resets. So this is for employers with fewer than 500 employees. And everybody resets to their original bank of hours, which would be up to 80 hours for emergency paid sick leave, and then 10 weeks of EFMLA. And now EFMLA qualifying reasons have been expanded to include sick, COVID related sick leave. So if all of this is news to you and you didn't check out our webinar yesterday, that webinar went into it a lot more in depth. You can go to our website and take a look at those slides, but that is the latest, Francine. So great question. Thank you.
All right. The next one is, we have a mandatory vaccination policy and made it a requirement to provide us the vaccination card to make a copy when they get vaccinated. We also encourage the employees to get on the vaccination list as soon as possible before the employees category opens up.
That's great.
There's a question.
Yeah, well, she's sharing an anecdote. I appreciate that, Teresa.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what they're doing. So this is great. So you have a mandatory vaccination policy, and your employees are required to provide you a copy of the vaccination card. You're also encouraging them to get on the vaccination list as soon as possible, even before the category opens up. So those are steps that you can take. Sounds like it's working out okay for you, Teresa, and getting them on the list is key. And making it, providing them links and information, so right into their inbox. It makes it easier for them to do that. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, Lisa says, just for my clarification, we have chosen not to mandate vaccines. We can request that employees disclose whether they've been vaccinated. Is the safest way to do that through an incentive? How else can we ask? Currently, our company wouldn't fall under those eligible to get it, except by age or health risk, which in itself seems risky for discrimination.
Yeah, so if you have chosen not to mandate, so if your policy is voluntary, you can request that employees disclose whether or not they have been vaccinated. You can ask. So basically what you can say is, if you've gotten the vaccine, here's how you let us know. Maybe you set up a Google form, maybe you have used iSolved, maybe you have a different type of platform you can use, or maybe it's someone with an Excel spreadsheet that is kept confidential. You can ask that. is the safest way to do that through an incentive? I think it just depends on your workforce and what their reasons for not getting it would be. What you don't want is the reason. You just want the yes or no answer. So yes, it is risky in that you don't want to put them on the spot. You just need to, maybe what you do is float your policy, put out some educational efforts, do whatever feels right for your culture. And then every week or two, send out an email reminding people, hey, don't forget, if you've gotten your vaccine, come see Lisa and let her know, or upload your information to this Google form so that we can accurately track. And that way you're not singling out employees or otherwise sort of going door to door, as it were, asking them, hey, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? Because that might make people a little weirded out.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question. I think it does, Lisa, but if not, let me know.
All right, Brenda says, is there a sample vaccine policy available on your site or on the CDC site?
There is, Brenda. There's on our COVID page, there's a sample vaccine policy, both for voluntary and mandatory. I got those from the Society for Human Resources Management. They are not dictated by any sort of like federal agency. You could use an attorney to come up with one. You could use what I provided for the bare bones, and then I've had clients sort of use that as the base, the foundation, and then add their own sort of cultural touch to it, and obviously their own unique instructions as to how to ask questions or make a accommodation request. But yeah, I mean, there are other organizations out there that have policies too. If you're unsure, or if you don't like the ones that we've posted on our website, I would consult an attorney. I know it sounds extreme, but I think it would be the safest bet, just if you're starting from scratch and you really want something that's custom to you guys. Otherwise, check out the ones on our website and see if they'll work for you.
Okay, that's all the questions. Diane says, thank you so much, that this was easy to follow and understand.
Oh, good. Well, that is my goal. a lot of information.
It was, but it was good that you had it all there on the slides, because then people can go back and refer to those.
Yeah, and like I said, the actual presentation I've hidden about 6 or 7 slides, and I'll make sure those are unhidden when we post it. There's some more information out there, but I just wanted to keep it under the hour mark. And I know it's a lot to disseminate. Every time I go on the CDC website, I have to breathe into a paper bag because it's just so huge. But there are definitely some useful things on it. And certainly, it's a time of a little bit of cautious optimism, but also a time of maintaining some, unfortunately maintain some pandemic behaviors. And I just read this morning that cases are now rising again in 14 states. And so we just want to make sure that we continue to stay this course of the national numbers falling. So it's important not to be complacent, but it's also important to be proactive. If you decide to establish a vaccine policy, that's a great way to help flatten that curve and to get your business hopefully back to somewhat of a normal operating status. So we hope you guys, we wish you luck. Please let us know if you have any additional questions. Send them to questions@dominionpayroll.com, and we will do our best to answer them. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being my question asker today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, everybody have a nice St. Patrick's Day. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.